Financials. Let's take a deep dive into pensions in Nigeria. As a recent agitation by the Nigeria Police and the National Assembly staff to exit the contributory pension scheme, which is further pressuring the pension industry. Let's not forget, late last year, proposed legislation titled A Bill for an Act to Amend the Pension Reform Act 2014 to exempt the National Assembly service from the CPS and establish the National Assembly Service Pension Board, and for related matters was sponsored by Olododo Cook, who is the chairman, House Committee on National Planning and Economy Development. So joining us to discuss that and more in Nigeria's pension industry is Mr. Dave Uduanu, who is the MD, CEO, Access Pensions. You're very welcome, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. So we're seeing pension assets grow 14.9 trillion as at December of last year. But, we've got these, parties that are looking to pull out. Talk about the benefits of the contributory pension scheme as opposed to what we have with the defined benefits and what you make of these entities wanting to pull out.
Okay, thank you, Rochis. I think we need to go back to where we started.
Yeah.
We ran a defined benefit scheme that was broken by 2004 and had a deficit of over 2.7 trillion naira. Globally, countries in the world have migrated from DB schemes to DC schemes. For context, DC schemes now account for 54% of global assets, pension assets under management. 20 years ago, it was 20%. That tells you something. There's a huge migration to DC schemes because DC schemes are superior.
Yeah.
First of all, there's intergenerational equity, which means that I pay for my pension, I save for my pension.
Yes.
For a DB scheme, my pension will be paid by my kids or grandchildren when I'm in my 60s and 70s. Secondly, government deficit globally have meant that government are just not able to meet those pension promises. So DB schemes are pension promises. They are pay as you go, and it's not sustainable. So I think the agitation should be taken within that light. I think that what we need to do is to look at why are this agitation taking place. Some people say their pensions are not enough, and the solution is not to disband the DC scheme. The solution is to increase the contribution of the employers.
Right.
If you take the police, for instance, their argument primarily is that as policemen, they defend the country and they should not contribute to their pensions. And we say, well, that's a bit disingenuous, but if you must do that, what you can say is that let the federal government make the contribution both for the employer and the employee benefit, but stay within the DC schemes. And I think that finally, as a country, we just need to put a stop to that because Nigeria, given a debt overhang, cannot afford to add another. DB schemes are future debt which must be paid. So these agitations, I think they're a bit misguided, but we need to address it in totality. And I think the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank, and federal government need just to address it and say, look, all these exclusions are not required. The DC scheme is working well. Pension funds are growing. For the first time, we have a large pot of money, 15 trillion, which can be used to finance national development.
Fantastic. Also want to talk to you about mergers and acquisitions within the space. Kind of seen, I think the number of players have shrunk from 21 to 19 or so. What do you make of, the M&A activity there? Competition, banks even jumping in. Wow, how do you see that playing out? It sounds exciting.
Well, it's very exciting. I mean, we were quite active last year.
Yeah, you were.
So
yeah.
We used to be owned by a PE fund, and Access Corporation bought Sigma and First Guarantee, and now created Access Pension. And it's quite exciting because in 1 year, we've moved our assets from about 550 to just under 1 trillion. And for context, there are about 20 pension fund administrators in the country.
Okay.
10 of them control 90% of the industry. The top 5 control 67% of the industry. So that tells you that there's a race to consolidation. The banks are coming. The banks come with resources, obviously.
Yep.
And, big pension funds are required because big pension funds are able to invest in the staff, invest in retail network, and more importantly, invest in digital offering, which today, basically, we are talking about financial inclusion and all these things CBN is doing. And, we are in that process where you have to have this digital offering. But more importantly, we also compete for talent. If I give you an example, last year, half of the CFA charter holders are qualified. Half of them are in Canada. We have to compete with these people, and you need a big pension fund to do this. So I think customers are better off, and the banks are a welcome development because the banks in Nigeria have been hugely successful in taking banking from where it was 30 years ago to where it is today. And I think we can learn a lot from them. They've done a lot of M&As. For instance, Access Bank have grown by M&As, and I don't think pensions is different. So I think the marginal players, I see quite a lot of mergers and acquisitions going to happen this year and next year as people get more clarity about, pension schemes. The other last point is bundled products. Today, if you're a customer of Access Pensions, whilst you have an RSA account with you, remember you can use part of your RSA to do mortgages. Guess what? Access Bank can give you those mortgages.
Okay.
So are you not better off,
So,
with a PFA that is owned by a bank like Access and others? Yeah.
Sounds great. Now, I want to ask you about the administration's growth targets for the micro pensions. I mean, they were looking at about, I think, 20 million accounts by 2024 or 2025, and we haven't seen, that growth there. So launched March 2019, they were 8.5 million to 20 million, and it hasn't quite grown. So what's been the drag for micro pensions?
Well, micro pension, I would say, is early days. So pension is long-term savings, and we're just not used to long-term savings in Nigeria. Remember that 20 years ago, we didn't have pension fund. And I always say to people, the reason why pension scheme grew very quickly was because it was mandatory. People were forced to save. Sometimes you have to force people to do things that are good for them, even in their enlightened self-interest, but they don't know it's good for them. So what we need to do with micro pension is a lot of campaigns, education, but more importantly, bundled products. So let me give you an example. If you're selling micro pension with health insurance, with life insurance, suddenly it becomes interesting to people. It's difficult for somebody to wake up and say, I want to save for retirement.
Right.
When you are in the formal sector, when do you retire? They don't retire. So we are coming up with an attractive proposition at Access Pension. I mean, I don't want to go into details. I'll just say watch that space.
Okay.
You will see
no
a lot
teaser.
of
I don't want to
changes.
give us a teaser.
No, not yet. But
Okay.
it's something that we're really, really focused on. Access Bank has 62 million retail customers. There's no reason why we can't crack that 20 million mark over the next 5 years. If we work well with the regulator and a lot of education and enlightenment campaign and bundled products and benefits to those savers.
Great stuff. Restructuring of debts. We've seen what's going on in Ghana, and with respect to the government proposing a restructuring, and how that could affect the pensions, PFAs in Ghana. Do you see that being mirrored here? Is that, because there's a lot of talk about our debt. You even mentioned our debts, earlier.
So our debt, we have to put it in context. Our debt, Ghana debt is about 94% of GDP.
Yep.
Nigeria debt is about 20% of GDP. Ghana is a much smaller economy. Nigeria has a huge, market, and we're underpinned by oil. Even though oil is going out of fashion, but we still have a lot of it on the ground, which we haven't sold a lot of that. Number two is that most of our debts are local currency debts. Their foreign currency debt is about 8% of GDP, while local currency debt is about 12% of GDP. What I see playing out here is a restructuring of the balance sheet of the country. It's almost like a to-do list for the next finance minister. So what we need to do, first of all, is to increase. Nigeria has a revenue problem.
Yep.
So we need to increase our revenue. Tax last year was 10 trillion. Why don't we double that? Secondly, how about the subsidy? That's another 5 trillion.
Yeah.
So that's 15 trillion. How about government assets? Recently government launched a bold scheme with MoFi, which is basically holding, I think they say $20 billion of government assets, NNPC type assets. How about privatizing those assets? And finally, can you sort of curtail, I don't want to go into the political manifestos of the candidates, but if you can move expenditure from CapEx from government balance sheet to off balance sheet through PPPs, you will do a lot. And finally, ramp up your oil production. But I think that as a country, we need to put a debt ceiling in place like they do in the US. Because
you think that will work?
Oh yeah, that will work.
But the US keeps raising their own.
But it's good to raise it. But before you raise it, there's a big national debate about raising it.
Gotcha.
But today, any government, remember that 10 years ago, we didn't have a debt problem. Today we have a debt problem.
Yeah.
So if we solve this problem, we need to basically, the solution is we need to restructure our balance sheet. But there's no problem. I don't think anybody should worry about the debt problem affecting pension funds, because Nigeria's economy has the capacity to walk through these challenges. There are some quick wins. If you merge the two exchange rates, suddenly you have a lot of naira in your hand.
True. Yep.
So Anyway, let's leave that for
I know.
politicians to deal with.
So much to discuss. I want to ask you about deals that the pension fund, the fund managers are looking at. There was a webinar held by PenUp. I think the CEO, Mr. Oguchi Aguda, CEO of Pension Fund Operators, and here's what he said here. Fund managers are looking to invest in impact-focused funds, but transparency and structure are key. A poll shows 75% are either actively looking or will consider investing in impact-focused fund. I mean, what does that mean for alternative assets, infrastructure, and so on? Isn't there enough transparency already?
Well,
What's your take?
This is a perennial question. Look, everything is contextual, and progress is also important to demonstrate that progress has been made. The last time I spoke about this topic, maybe we had committed to maybe no or one infrastructure fund. Today we have 2 infrastructure funds that are fully running, 3 infrastructure funds actually, and we have 2 we're looking at. We have committed to 2 real estate funds, 3 private equity funds. Now, let me just ask by way of, again, going back to what the alternative managers, alternative assets requires a different skill set.
Yeah.
You can't just turn up and set up a PE fund or infrastructure fund.
Okay.
On the infrastructure side, I think the progress has been made on the debt side of things, anchored on FGN bonds. So if you're doing your roads and all that and you pay FGN plus 200, 300 basis points, the pension funds will take it up.
Okay.
So infra credits have also done a lot.
Yeah.
So we've made a lot of progress actually. Where we haven't made a lot of progress, where we haven't made significant progress is in greenfield infrastructure. Because of the risk involved in greenfield infrastructure. Pension funds globally don't finance greenfield infrastructure. It's not just a Nigeria phenomenon. You need to bring guarantees because there's construction risk and there's government risk.
Yeah.
Look at the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. It's been going on for
forever.
So if pension fund had invested in it, how do we pay pensions?
Right.
However, once these infrastructure assets are constructed, they become brownfield or they are de-risked, they can then unbundle them. That is why we're saying that what we need to do, if you look at within the framework of Infraco or what the Sovereign Wealth Fund is doing, there are some infrastructure assets that are low-hanging fruit. The second Niger Bridge has been completed. Yep. So you can raise a bond on the back of second Niger Bridge and free those monies for new infrastructure assets. The other 2 asset classes, real estate, what PENCOM have done on the use of RSA for mortgage is going to free up a lot of funding for housing. That 25% number, when we did it, it's about 2 trillion naira. So suddenly, what we are looking at is how do we get affordable housing, not mass housing, affordable housing for the population. So on the housing side, I think we are going to see a lot of traction this year. Shelter Africa just launched a bond last year, and we are seeing more offerings from people like Mixta, from Alpha Mid and Co. On the PE side, the biggest problem with the PE is the currency overhang. Yeah. So you raise a dollar fund and you're investing in naira. Mismatch, a problem. Yeah. But we are beginning to see naira funds. I think that finally, what I would say is that at 15 trillion, the pension funds have a lot of money and we can support credible assets that are, we like impact. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. We like impact, we like transparency. Those assets must have impact. There should be transparency, but more importantly, they should generate returns for the pension funds.
We had so many more questions for you, but unfortunately out of time, we have to have you back because I know you performed very well across the funds in terms of your returns. But look, we'll have to have you back. We have to have you back. Talk more about pension returns.
On that one,
real quick,
it's Access Pension. We did very well in the open PFA. We're number 1. Yeah. So the pension fund that came first, Police PFA, don't compete with us because the asset strategies are slightly different. We're number 1. We're top quartile manager, and we're going to deliver top quartile return this year.
That's what we
so hang on. Watch that space. Access Pension is here to change the narrative in terms of investment returns, in terms of the assets, where clear ambition is to be top 2 PFA in Nigeria, and we're going to do it. We have the people, we have the resources, we have the parents that have the experience and the resources to back us. So,
fantastic stuff. Great, always great having you on the show, sir. The MD, CEO of Access Pensions, Mr. David Uduanu. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.